1.5 years of my guest's life was, quote, filled to the brim with tragedies, failures, and redemption of the most uncommon sort. The title of Peter Chin's book says it all. Blindsided by God, disappointment, suffering, and the untamable goodness of God. Oh, I love the title. And I've spent days in an emotional roller coaster, Peter. I just thought, when I see this man, I want to hug him.
You did.
And I did.
That's right.
Can you take us to 2009?
Sure.
As the opening pages do, you're in a church plant, gave up a medical career to serve God, and you're in this church plant looking out. Well, actually, you didn't even want to start the service.
Right.
What was going on?
2009, leading up to that first chapter, that first kind of description, was a really difficult time for us. I did feel called to plant a church in Washington, D.C. with my wife and our 2 daughters, and moved into the city. But really, as soon as we started that process, one of the first things that happened was my wife miscarried our 3rd child, which was very difficult, surprisingly difficult for both of us. After that, we bought a new home in the city, and the day that we picked up the keys and opened the front door, the entire place had been ransacked, and toilets had been stolen, the ceiling fans, garbage disposal, everything. And
that is so unusual.
Yeah, they were really, I mean, I think they wanted to get anything that had any kind of value out of the house, and so that was our welcome to the neighborhood. So those 2 events were difficult, but what really made things really hard in that season was in the fall of 2009, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was a very aggressive kind that couldn't be treated by many sorts of medicine, and it actually started to spread to her arm, and so had to be treated right away. In addition to that,
can I just say that this particular breast cancer is known as a killer of young women?
Yeah, that was the hard news that we heard, that it spreads rapidly, it can't be treated by the modern medicines that have been developed, and it does kill young women very rapidly, like my wife. So that was incredibly difficult news to hear, and on the heels of it, our insurance company sent us a letter saying that they weren't responsible for her treatments, and so we would have to pay for it all on our own instead. And all of this, from my wife's miscarriage to that letter, took place in about a period of 6 months, and right after we had decided to plant the church. And so it was this collision between this sense of calling and purpose in planting this church and the worst experiences that we had ever faced. And that's kind of where the book starts off, with that difficult moment of
crucible.
Yeah, that's truly what it is. Yeah.
Of hardship and suffering. And by the way, the insurance issue was a real swindle. That was,
yeah, that's pretty bad.
You called them on it,
yeah,
and it was recovered. But you poignantly say that you felt that God was treating you like the insurance company. You felt betrayed by God.
Yeah, that was the realization that I made at the same time as I got that letter, that I was feeling betrayed by this company. But I kind of felt the same way about God, that I felt like God should have been protecting us, you know, kind of being our divine insurance company during that time. We shouldn't be going through these kind of things while planting a church. And when I turned to Scripture for some kind of consolation, a word of guidance, I realized that wasn't true, that when you look in Scripture, it's so consistent about following after God's will and suffering going hand in hand. I mean, the life of Jesus and the apostles, you know, not being surprised by trials and things like that. And what I realized in that moment is that it wasn't the Bible that had misled me. It was actually my very modern sensibilities and my kind of modern diluted faith. That's what had led me astray and kind of betrayed me and had told me that I wouldn't suffer. Because Scripture and the life of Christ told me very, very clearly that I would. And here I was feeling very betrayed. And so what I recognized is that my theology was not what I thought it was. My belief of who God was not quite as airtight as I had thought, even after years of seminary and ministry and things like that. And that's one of the blessings.
Epiphany was that we follow the suffering servant in a movement founded by martyrs.
Right.
Duh.
Right.
Yeah, maybe suffering is part of this.
Yeah.
My juvenile, imperfect faith imploded.
Yeah.
Your wife's faith was, you call her faith real faith.
Yeah, that's right.
You say of yourself, I have 50% faith with a lot of questions. You actually dedicate the book to your heroic wife.
Yeah. This is really my adoring fan letter to her, and she's so humble that she wouldn't write this book herself. She just wouldn't do it, even though it really is her story. And you know, she's very busy at raising kids and everything. And so I was the only one who had free time to do it. And so I told her that I would do it. And it really is a fan letter to her, but also a testimony of what God is able to do. I'm really the third character in line here. I think, you know, God's out there, and then my wife, and then I'm just kind of the bumbling narrator in the background, I think, for the most part.
Stop it. Just stop it. Because what you so vulnerably, meaningfully illustrate for us is a need that is very pervasive. First and foremost, there are people sitting in churches every Sunday who still don't get it, that it's about a personal relationship.
Right, right.
But beyond that, that there are depths in the journey. Well, Charles Stanley this month was asked if he would go through a certain trial again. And he said, well, if I could learn the same things.
Yeah.
Or if I couldn't learn the same things.
Yeah.
Another way.
Yeah.
That's the richness of understanding God's character and developing our own.
Yeah. That is one of the mysteries of what God's able to do, to use things that we hate, like suffering, like disappointment, and He can actually wield them into redemptive moments. And we don't ever pray for those kind of things to take place. I know I didn't pray for all these events to take place in my family's life, but I'd have to say the same thing, that I would never take it back, that I learned things about God that I couldn't learn in a book or even after years of ministry experience. It was that crucible that laid my theology bare and helped me rebuild it into something far better and far more close to what I think Scripture really talks about. So,
well, just when we think we're over the hump in this book, there's something else. So, chemo, your wife has had a mastectomy. You call it an amputation.
Before that, though, right at the mastectomy was something really interesting happened, because we went in for mastectomy to get rid of the tumor, and when she was on the gurney about to have the surgery, we found out that she was pregnant with our third child.
Okay, I thought that was before the chemo.
No. Yeah,
Oh.
That was right before the chemo, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And
Those things are happening.
Yeah, it happened right before the chemo where we found out about the pregnancy. And that was kind of the turning point of our story, because before then we didn't know what God was up to, or kind of questioning, but we really had the sense that God was in this moment, although we couldn't understand what He was doing, that He was present. And so our sense of God was not based off understanding this pregnancy that we just found out about, but that this deep sense that He was there.
If your wife had had another kind of breast cancer and had the hormone therapy, no baby.
Right, exactly. So we would have had a really tough decision, actually, and it was that unique form of cancer that allowed her to have her treatment and also have the pregnancy at the same time. So it was this, this strange mystery, the strange wisdom built into that moment for us. But yeah, so we heard about this baby. We recognized that God was up to something. We had no idea what it was, and that was kind of when everything shifted in our story.
The baby's name?
We named him Jonathan, which is the gift from God.
Gift from God?
Yeah, and that's truly what he was. And he was, our doctors advised us, our oncology doctors advised us not to have the pregnancy, that the baby probably wouldn't survive the chemo. It was too strong for a developing child. And my wife couldn't wait to have the chemo begin, because the cancer would spread too rapidly.
It's a very aggressive cancer.
Yeah, and so they told us either choose your wife's welfare or choose the baby's life, either one or the other. And so it was very discouraging news, but we felt like even though we couldn't understand it and this doctor couldn't understand it, that God was still here. And so we chose to go ahead with the pregnancy while having chemotherapy at the same time, knowing that it was God who would have to protect both of these lives.
You know, there's a moment in this book where you actually get out of bed and go down to your basement, and you are weeping in brokenness. And there is a presence.
Yeah.
And there are words. And you say this is the moment where you became a man.
Yeah, it was after hearing about the kind of cancer that my wife had, triple negative, and just realizing that she didn't just have cancer, but the worst kind of breast cancer that she could have. And after all of these, that collision of all these events, it just broke me. And I found myself weeping because I almost assumed that my wife would die after that point in time. And so I was weeping in my basement, and I did sense God's presence, but I felt him, I heard him saying something very different than I anticipated, which was, stop crying. And I was surprised by that because, I felt like whatever encouragement he would give would be something very soft and gentle, but I think it was something sterner about the fact that this was reality, and to face reality, and to play the cards that I had been dealt rather than lamenting that I hadn't been dealt the deck that I wanted. And so that was a real turning point for me. And I kind of go back and forth because I think lamentation and mourning is biblical. It's wonderful, but it also has an ending point. Even the Garden of Gethsemane is a perfect example that Jesus mourns and weeps deeply, but when it's time to get up, he gets up. And I think that's one of the ways we deal with suffering.
He gets up and faces the cross.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the ways that we deal with it, is we do mourn and we do lament, but at some point we must get up and we must deal with whatever the situation is.
And you are not alone. As a man, as a pastor, you felt you had no one you could share all your dark thoughts with. You were never alone.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that presence indicated, that in the darkest, worst moment that God was there. The answer was not crystal clear what he was doing, though, but he was there. And I think that's what I had to recognize, that God is going to be there, but he's not going to be exactly who I think he is all the time, and to be open to what his presence will tell.
Quick catch up now. You're on the Pacific Coast,
right.
Seattle, Washington, and there's another baby,
right.
Lucy.
Yeah. Quickly,
her name because?
Her name is Lucy because the fourth child of the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the children. And the doctors told us that we couldn't have that child because of chemo, but we had that child.
God didn't get the memo.
Exactly, and then another child after that, Xavier. And so just the mystery of how God works, that he's able to wield and use all these things to that effect.
Father of 5, and very much enlarged. And I'm sure there's going to be more.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yes.
So. Yeah.
Blindsided by God, disappointment, suffering, and the untamable goodness of God. May you find it today. If you're doubting it, please call our prayer lines.